Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Alabama Radio Moments. I'm Alex Colvin, and I'm the Public Programs Curator here at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Before we begin today's program, I have a few short announcements that I would like to share with you all. The first, I would like to invite you next Tuesday, March 28th, to a book talk here at the Archives when Dr. James Brown will be talking about Distracted by Alabama, Tangled Threads of Natural History, Local History, and Folklore. And that'll be a program here at the Archives and online at our Facebook and YouTube channels. I'd also like to invite you on Monday, April 3rd, to join us for another research rundown, as one of our archivists will talk about the digitized Civil War and Reconstruction governor papers. And that is going to be a virtual-only program on Monday, April 3rd, here on our Facebook and YouTube channels. And both of those are going to be noontime programs. So as you all know, hopefully by now, this series is created in connection to our temporary exhibit of the same name, Alabama Radio Moments. And that's an exhibit that looks at radio in Alabama, but also Alabamians on radio. And kind of it's a way to look at how that one medium affected the state, but also how Alabamians affected the medium itself. And so I'd like to thank, as a part of that, the Alabama Broadcasters Association, the Alabama Historic Radio Society, and the Alabama Humanities Alliance, who made the exhibit as well as this program series possible. Now on to introducing today's speaker. I am so excited to welcome Hi Phillips, who is the Vice President of Big River Broadcasting, Knox Music Incorporated, and High and Low Music Incorporated, and Sam Phillips Recording Service, and Digital Director and the booking agent for the Alabama Public Television series, Muscle Shoals to Music Row Live. Phillips is also the granddaughter of Sun Records founder, Sam Phillips, and she began her career in radio and music 20 years ago. Halley is two-time Radio Wayne and Award recipient, and her career has led to working relationships with the National Association of Broadcasters, the Alabama Broadcasting Association, and Radio Inc. Halley serves on the board of the Muscle Shoals Music Association and is a former vice president, governor of the Memphis chapter of the Recording Academy. Welcome, Halley.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that introduction. That was great. I am very proud to be able to speak today about WHER Radio, the first all-girl radio station in the nation. My grandmother, Becky Phillips, who I was very close to, was the program director for this all-girl radio station in the 1950s, which was just kind of a crazy idea. And my grandfather, Sam Phillips, was the man who had the idea to start the all-girl radio station. Most people are familiar with my grandfather, Sam Phillips, as being the founder of Sun Records. He launched the careers of artists like B.B. King, the Howlin Wolf, Jackie Brenson and his Delta Cats, Ike Turner, Roscoe Gordon, Little Milton, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Elvis Presley, the Prisonaires, Charlie Rich. So many extremely talented individuals that really shaped the sound that we know today as rock and roll. But what a lot of people don't know is that his first love was radio. A lot of people don't know that he was actually born in Florence, Alabama, which is where I'm sitting right now inside of our radio group, Big River Broadcasting, that our family still continues to own and operate today. His first love was radio. He was born in 1923, right here in Florence, Alabama. He was one of 7 children. His father was a tenant farmer. They were pretty poor. They picked a lot of cotton. Sam had just a very deep love and connection for all people. Being one of 7 children, his family also took in a lot of other people. From what I understand, they helped raise 3 other children, and they also took in and took care of his deaf, mute Aunt Emma. Sam was particularly close to his Aunt Emma. He learned how to communicate with her through sign language, and the cruelty of her exclusion from the world of sound really had a profound impact on him. He kind of became obsessed with sound. He was in love with sound. He was in love with radio. He would always say that radio took him away. They also took in a Black sharecropper named Silas Payne, who was blinded by syphilis. And Sam was very impacted by him as well, just because he really got by in life by what he was able to hear. So Sam was a very unique child. When he was in the 6th grade, they moved off of North Royal Avenue in Florence, Alabama, very close to the Armistead Church, which was an all-Black church. It was very small. It was usually so packed that people had to stand outside. And he would walk down there, and he loved that sound. He became obsessed with it. And he had a lot of friends, Black and white, and he really didn't understand why they couldn't go to the same school together. They were all poor. So he was a little different than your average child growing up between, the 1920s and the 1940s. He was actually on a religious revival trip on his way to Dallas when he came across Bill Street. And he knew one day after he heard all of that great blues music that he wanted to introduce that to the world, and primarily to white people, because back then radio was still segregated, which is crazy to think about today, but it was. But before I can dive into really WHER, I want to continue to take you guys on this journey, because it's important for you guys to know the steps that he took in radio that took him from Florence, Alabama to Memphis, Tennessee, and to launch this out-of-the-box idea with these really pioneering women. So my grandfather met his wife, Becky, at a 250-watt radio station in Sheffield, Alabama. That's where she was from. And if you're familiar with the shoals, it's like the Quad Cities. It's Florence, Alabama, Sheffield, Tuscumbia, Muscle Shoals. So the Quad Cities. But she was one of the few females on the radio in 1942. He fell in love with her voice, he said, before he ever even saw her. In the 40s, it was hard to find a lot of men to work due to World War II. And Becky's sister, Erin, was married to the manager at WLAY. So he took a chance on Becky. She did several programs. One program, she played popular swing tunes. Another program, she sang, and her sister, Arlene, played the piano. And the two also did a show called Dear Diary. It was featuring little scripts written by Arlene that led into each song. And Becky also played the ukulele, and she was also an incredible writer. After they got married, they worked together at WMSL in Decatur, Alabama. And then Sam got a job at WLAC in Nashville. They moved to Memphis in 1945 after the birth of their first son, Knox Phillips. Sam got a job at WREC. It was located inside the basement of the Peabody Hotel. He was working as an engineer, as a disc jockey, an announcer, a maintenance man. At night, he was in charge of the big band broadcast that went nationally over CBS. It was a pretty prestigious job. He really had found success in radio at that point. He would mix all the big bands that were coming through. In 49, he was working day and night at WRC. He was really struggling to make ends meet. His family, they were actually living on the top of a garage behind the house in Memphis. His dreams were really far and beyond the radio acts that were coming through and the big bands. He really wanted to record Black artists. That's what he was most passionate about. And other individuals who he felt like were kind of underdogs who wouldn't be given a chance. So in October of 49, he was still working at WRAC, and he leased an old auto repair shop at 706 Union Avenue. He had very little money, he did most of the work himself. And on January 2nd, 1950, he opened the Memphis Recording Service. While he was trying to get things off the ground there, he was still working jobs at the Peabody. He was very busy, like sometimes 20 hours a day. It actually led to a nervous breakdown. He had to get shock therapy treatment, and I'm not kidding. And the stories are kind of funny. I can remember my grandmother telling me that they wouldn't let her stay in the hospital with him at night. So she would hide under the bed, and then she would crawl out of the window and come back in the morning like she wasn't there, because she never wanted to leave his side. But he was working really hard, and that really is a true story. He had a total mental breakdown. From the start, later WHER disc jockey Marion Keisker worked as Sam's assistant at the Memphis recording service. Their slogan at that time was, "We record anything, anywhere, anytime." And that was the truth. Like I said, he was obsessed with sound, and he was an incredibly hard worker. So, I mean, they would record weddings, talent shows, and even funerals. He used to go and record funerals and hide the microphones in the floral arrangements so nobody could see them, and families would have that forever. But he did all of that to support the passion that he really believed in, which was the blues. He would drive over 65,000 miles a year taking records out to radio stations all over to try to get them played. During that time, while he was doing all that, he also started applying with the FCC for his own radio station. It took him almost 4 years to get it. He was really persistent. He knew all of his life that he had wanted to own his own radio station. It was unclear for a while whether or not he would get his license. And it's actually pretty funny, when he was working with Elvis Presley, before Elvis became a big star, Elvis would drive him to Arkansas kind of as a chauffeur when he was scouting availability for the frequency for that station. It's just funny to me that he's driving around and nobody realizes it's Elvis Presley, and then here he is, this giant star. Anyway, so but at the time when he applied, he was going to do all Black programming. But by the time the license came through, WDIA, which was the first all Black radio station in Memphis, was already extremely successful. Sam loved that station, and it just was not a position that he wanted to be in to compete with that station at all. He just wanted to support it. So, with the coming of television, radio was scrambling for new approaches. The airwaves in the 1950s in Memphis were jammed. At that time, he said nobody in their right mind would put a daytime radio station on the air against some of the biggest competition. And he thought, how can I do this? What can I do that would set myself apart from everything else that is already going on all over the airwaves? So he had a conversation with my grandmother, Becky, and they had this wild idea that they believed that women in radio would have a lot of appeal. So he was lucky enough to get the call letters, WHER. So you remove the W and you've got her. Sam had a frequency, he had a vision, but he needed money. He did sell Elvis Presley's contract in 1955, but he still didn't quite have enough money to buy all of the equipment and build the station. And he had heard about this guy, Kimmons Wilson, who was really a hustler and had some money and was willing to take a chance on people who had great ideas. He's also the founder of the Holiday Inn. So he told Kimmons that if he could have $25,000, he could get the station up and off the ground. So he said, "I'll tell you what, I'll give you $25,000, and when you get it on the air, I'll get all my money back, and you'll own half of it." So that is how things kind of led to the beginning of WHER radio. Sam was always a pioneering spirit, like I said before, recording Black musicians in very segregated times. People treated him really badly for that, but he didn't care because he had such a love for humanity. He had such a belief in the sound and that it was everyone's music. And same way with women. Why not? Why not women? Why not women be over the airwaves? But just like people were ugly to him about the type of music he was recording, they were also pretty ugly about an all-girl radio station. The call letters, WHER, people would tease them and call them WHOR. So the 1950s was kind of a difficult time for this to be going on, but it really did change the world forever. This slideshow that I'm about to show you features audio that's produced by a couple of other really pioneering women. Davia Nelson and Nikki Silva are the Kitchen Sisters, and they produced a series on NPR called Lost and Found Sound. They did a segment on WHER back in the 90s. They were only able at that time to locate like 14 of the 40 or more women that worked for WHER over its 17-year run. And the segment that they sent to me that they said I could use for this is over an hour long. So I cut it down to make it much shorter for you guys today so you can kind of see the high moments, but I could probably talk for days about this story. So anyways, I hope you enjoy.
On October 29, 1955, Memphis was introduced for the first time to a brand new idea in radio entertainment. The city's 9th radio station at that time was to have an all-girl announcing staff. This was definitely a first for Memphis, and not only for Memphis, but for the entire nation as well.
We signed on October the 29th, 1955. You would have thought that we had invented a whole new means of communication.
Good morning. This is WHER Radio, America's first all-girl radio station, Memphis, Tennessee. We cordially invite you to stay tuned to WHER Radio all day, every day.
The thing was, nobody knew that we were going to be all girl. Each girl thought she was going to be the only girl on the radio station. Dottie Abbott, who I hired as general manager, I told Dottie, and she almost shouted, "I don't believe you, Sam. I know you're crazy, but you're not that crazy." You know, I mean, she was just beside herself. You were invading man's territory. I mean, you were supposed to be a guest or something if you're going to do anything as a woman on radio.
Abbott was experienced. Marion Keisker was experienced. And I had been in radio. The other girls were mostly new, like Barbara Gurley and Bobby Stout and Faye Russell.
My wife, Becky, that's how I met her in radio. We were both kids in high school. Worked part-time at a little station in Alabama, our hometown. I'm Sam Phillips, and I'd wanted a radio station all my life. Radio, to me, it's a living thing.
My name is Betty Berger. My career started in 1956 when I went to work for WHER. Sam's wife, Becky, has a beautiful radio voice. And I think Sam recognized that, thinking, well, what would that sound like? Women playing records and music and talking and saying commercials and doing the news. That's different.
There just weren't many women's voices back then. Maybe some of the radio stations would have one woman who worked there.
WREC's charming women's reporter.
A country dance was being held in a garden. I felt a bump and heard an "oh, beg your pardon." Suddenly, I saw polka dots and moonbeams all around a pug-nosed tree.
In the meantime, this is Kitty Kelly reminding you as always to be kind, even to people.
Marion Keisker, she had the most beautiful radio voice. It was like velvet. She did something called Kitty Kelly.
I dreamed I was walking down the street in my slips. Well, turning from such items, we do want to introduce you now to two very charming studio guests.
I'm Dot Fisher. I was with WHER from 1955 through 1957. I was there the day it opened. I was a graduate of Memphis State University, looking for a job. and Marion Keisker interviewed me.
There's more to the job of girl announcer than what you hear from your radio. The girls pick their own music, run their own control board, plus looking after our remote control transmitter here at our studio. We have to take and log all transmitter readings every half hour, as well as keep a program log.
Hello, this is Barbara Gurley with Spotlight on Glamour. I was one of the first girls at WHER. I have been in some beauty contests. I won Miss Shelby County and went on to Miss Tennessee for Miss Universe. Sam had heard my voice and liked it, and he had Dottie call me. And I said, well, I know nothing about working controls, but they had so much faith in each girl. They just put me right in there. I played some music, and I gave beauty tips. And I was a receptionist, gave tours.
We took people that had, just like I did with Memphis Recording Service and later on Sun Records, that had no experience whatsoever. And you were in a big market at that time. Memphis, Tennessee was a big market even in the 50s.
WHBQ Time Center News from Memphis.
Radio Memphis, WMPS, the station that gives you all the latest news on time, all the time.
Before I went to work for WHER, I worked for WDIA, which was the world's first black radio station. But I worked there as a copywriter. I was not an announcer. No white people as stars. They were all black.
Best my bones, tell you something. Let me tell you about a biscuit baptized.
This is Donna Barlett. I remember in particular the flour ads, and I wrote the spots.
You bake your biscuit with Martha White self-rising flour with hot rice. You baptize them in butter. Eat it. You sop your way on to the promised land after the baptizing. You got it?
And the reason I went there is that I wanted to be on the air, and I knew I could never be on the air at DIA.
It cost me a lot, but there's one thing that I've got. It's my mind. Cold and wet, tired you bet, but all that I soon forget with my mind.
Our studios were in the third Holiday Inn that was built in the world. I wanted to be in the Holiday Inn because it was just something about it. Such a real new concept. Kimmons Wilson, the man that really revolutionized the hotel motel world. And he said, by the way, I've got a place that I think it'll just work real fine if you want to look at it. We put more radio into the smallest place. There was not 1 inch wasted. Well, it didn't have an inch to waste. The little studio had a name. It was called the Doll Den.
Oh, yes, the doll. That was the one where the sales were.
It was pink and purple in very delicate colors. It was decorated and painted like a dollhouse.
Propaganda was the newsroom. Equipment was bras and panties and hose.
We had a little clothesline. It had all the little unmentionables. Just something to make a little fun thing. And people come up and they say, oh, the other stations thought we were nuts. You know, I mean, they didn't do anything even close to what we were doing.
It wasn't anything but fun. That's what it was. But now, don't take me wrong. It was serious business, too. It was a great challenge to us, and we took it seriously.
I didn't want anybody to think that we were building this radio station to promote Sun Records. Now, believe me, I love rock and roll. I loved it then and I love it now. But I knew the concept we had for this station, that we were not going to use any of my great rock and roll records. This is how dedicated to the feel we wanted to get in that station. There was a dearth, an absolute dearth of album music. There was so much good music on the 12-inch LPs that was not being played, especially daytime radio. We were only a daytime station. Sun up to sundown. The day I sold Elvis's contract, we signed the option papers. I went down. That was the only time that I played some record, Mystery Train. I just had to be a part of it.
I think at that time we were like two separate worlds. The WHER world, which was the world of smooth music, beautiful ballads. And then there was the world of Elvis, which was Sun Records, Sam, the beginning of rock and roll.
Becky Phillips, she was the final word on what we played. She spent a lot of time listening to the new albums. She wasn't judging it for whether the song was any good or not. She was judging it for tempo and bad words. She'd say, says damn. That means, no, you cannot play this. And she would put a note on the song itself telling us what kind of tempo we would play. Fast, slow, medium. Fast, slow, medium.
In 1965, we moved into the Mid-City building. That time, it was the most glamorous, beautiful place. So very feminine. It was first class all the way.
The lobby had a mirror about 8 feet tall. In the middle, it said, beauty reflected in sound, WHER 1430. And we used that as sort of a theme. Doors and everything all had little whimsical things that had to do with women's little peccadillos.
We built it where people could come into the lobby at the Mid-City building and they could stand and watch all the girls broadcast. And you could just see so well the girls doing their thing, and the speaker would be out there where they could hear them.
Soft lights, and of course the control room was glassed in. There was a big glass cage where we sat.
Sometimes we would do remote broadcasts, like we always broadcast the golf matches.
Stand by for another golf report from Peggy Sternberger coming up in a moment.
Peggy Sternberger was a well-known woman's golfer, and she was a really good commentator. And of course, that was something, I don't know why, it seemed womanly. So we could get big sponsors for the golf matches.
Here's Peggy Sternberger.
At this point now, in the 36 holes of the Westchester Classic is Larry Henson.
Peggy was one of the real pioneers in women sportscasting. She would cover all the major tournaments, the only woman who was covering all the major tournaments. So she was a groundbreaker, and eventually from WHER, she went ahead and did some stuff for CBS for golf.
This is Ray Sherman, United Press International in Memphis. 1,000 striking sanitation workers marched on Memphis City Hall this afternoon and demanded Mayor Henry Loeb hear their grievances.
I urge you to go to work. I promise you that we're working on a raise and have been before this matter came up.
Urged the Memphis Negro community to engage in a general work stoppage.
I'm Jane Rodak, WHER. There was a garbage strike. Tempers were running high. People that weren't involved in it were angry that we were having all this garbage all over and nobody was collecting the garbage. Garbage workers trying to get fair compensation. It was just a very volatile time.
Tomorrow, the strike moves into the third day, and the mayor is expected to take emergency action.
All labor
striking for higher
has dignity. You are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wage.
King promised to return to Memphis Friday to lead a general work stoppage.
Memphis had this story about itself that everything was separate, but it was equal. And when that spotlight got turned on the segregated city that Memphis was, it was obvious it wasn't equal at all.
Pilot said over the public address system, we are sorry for the delay. But we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane. And to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane. And we've had the plane protected and guarded all night. Then I got into Memphis. And some began to say the threats, or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now.
I remember standing at the news machine and watching the news tap out that Martin Luther King had just been shot.
Like anybody, I would like to live.
Marge was on the air, and I took her the paper, and I could not talk and tell her what I had in my hands. I couldn't talk.
I just want to do God's will.
He was killed in the late afternoon.
He's allowed me to go
I was on the air, and they chose open mic because of a big listening audience to pay respects. I can remember reading the prepared statement, then played a Mahalia Jackson hymn, and then I said, now we'll take calls.
that we as a people will get to the promised land.
I thought, what? I was stunned. Charlie Sullivan was stunned. We had nothing on the air. I mean, this is dead silence. And I got up and walked out.
The police department they attempted to turn one of the squad cars over.
On the way home, I saw people standing on the corner with shotguns. I'd never seen it before.
And I remember looking out at my window and seeing tanks driving down Union Avenue.
You're listening to Jane on your all-girl station, 6 minutes before 1 o'clock.
And know that I love
People started burning things and throwing things, and marches were happening, and marches had been happening, peaceful, demonstration marches, but these were angry marches. And Charlie would give us our little tape recorder and say, they're going to have a march on Beale Street this afternoon. Will you go and get a news report? And of course, we all wanted to go.
We were on the air when people were calling to get interviews, to find out what was going on. Of course, they chose us last because we didn't have any guys, it was all women.
We were not known to be sharp broadcasters. We were lady disc jockeys. But even our station started having calls from all over the world. I'll never forget being on the air and some station in Australia calling me and wanting a report at that moment. So I ad-libbed a report.
After that happened, we had a daily topic because Charlie felt like it was risky to let people call up and vent their hatred from both sides, blacks and whites.
We're talking about schools and education. Hope you can stay with us until 2 o'clock here on WHER.
What I was wondering was in a way that the black people could participate in your program.
Oh, yes, ma'am. We have many black people that participate in our program at this time. People who have a handicap.
The talk show was something that made a difference in this town. In the meantime, all around the talk show, we were still playing Ray Conniff. There were little dollops of political awareness wedged in between that.
And now the latest WHER worldwide and local news. The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong have made their boldest strike of the Cambodian War. The Phnom Penh airport today is a scene of chaos and devastation. This has been the latest WHER worldwide and local news. Joan Medley reporting.
I never thought of working at WHER as being something historical. Yes, it was the first all-girl radio station. Yeah, I made a little history. I was the first African-American woman to work there. But you never think you're part of history.
We have a little bit of history today because Sam had a dream and he was able to take that dream and make something out of it. I think all of your innovators today are the same way. They have dreams, they have ideas, they seem impossible to everybody else. But for those people, they go right ahead with it, and look where we are today because of dreamers.
There was a man out there who thought women could talk on radio and be accepted and could be very good at it. And the man was Sam Phillips. It was the beginning of many openings for women in broadcasting, where women were not accepted before.
This is Becky Phillips speaking for WHER owners, Mr. Sam Phillips and Mr. Kemmons Wilson.
There's something about your voice out of the night, out of the light, out of the sky, out of the ground. Here comes your voice. There was just something special in the air when WHER was on the air. And there was something special about being inside of that radio station, too, when it was taking place. I mean, and it was not, I'm telling you, it was not a novelty very long. It was a novel idea. I mean, WHER was an embryo of the egg because there wasn't anything else like it in the world.
This is WHER Radio, America's first all-girl radio station, Memphis, Tennessee. Stay tuned to WHER Radio all day, every day for sparkling, bright music, the latest worldwide news, and up-to-the-minute local and regional news from the WHER News Department.
Well, that kind of makes me emotional, you guys. Sorry about my tears, but it's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful. Sam, shaped the world of music and radio. My grandmother, Becky Phillips, gave people like me a chance. I'm sitting here right now, like I said before, at Big River Broadcasting. We went on the air here in 1973 with WQLT. So 50 years later, here I am. I'm a woman, and I don't know why I'm so emotional. So maybe someone else should take control before I just become a blubbering mess over here. But I'm just extremely proud of my family. I'm proud that that's my background, and I'm proud that it's a more normal thing for women to be in the workplace, even though it's still a struggle today. We still hear about it. We still face challenges. But to me, that was a huge launch point for change for all of us. So, Alex, I don't know if you want to come in.
I'd be more than happy to. Thank you so much for sharing your family story. I am completely agree with you that there is something so inspirational about hearing not only the story, but from their voices as well, and hearing their version of it, and hearing some of the clips also from the station. It really was a kind of world-changing moment, WHER was. And so I'd love to have a chance to be able to talk with you a little bit more about it, but also make sure our audience knows that if you have any questions that you would like me to ask, you can just put them in the comments below. It'll show up to me and I'll be able to share them with Ms. Phillips. First off, I'd like to start with just something a little bit lighter, and kind of talk about some of the content of WHER. So in it, your grandfather mentions, he's not going to put rock and roll on here. They have their own sound. There's this dearth in music and albums aren't being played. Can you tell us a little bit more about what music they did focus on? We heard a little bit about some of the restrictions of no cursing or things like that, but what kind of music did they gravitate towards on WHER?
It was really easy listening music. It was artists like Ella Fitzgerald and Frank Sinatra, Billie Holiday, just stuff that was really beautiful, really bright. My grandmother always called it sparkling bright music. And so that was the kind of music that they played. Their content was that way too. I mean, the types of commercials that they produced that were, geared towards and highlighted women was also very unusual, and every girl, I think Sam mentioned this in that audio clip, but every girl thought that they were going to be the only girl, because it just was like, I mean, are you kidding me? In the 1950s, like everyone was female except for the engineer. But every job, and it was different back then. I mean, now we've got automation systems. It is a little bit easier to transmit everything out and produce a radio program. But back then, they had reel-to-reels going, they were playing records. I mean, my grandmother's record collection that she preserved her entire life, those records still have written on it the tempo like they talked about, and that's how they would program it. Now we've got software and it breaks it all up, so you don't play 10 slow songs in a row. Well, they'd have to get on the shelf and they'd have to pull it out based on what Becky Phillips would write on it, and and kind of hand write that out and go from there, which that's a lot of work.
Yeah. So your grandmother, because she's both, a personality on it, but she's also in many ways managing the entire station as well, correct?
Yeah, she was really kind of the last word with things, which there was incredibly strong women that had other roles that were equally as important there. Dottie Abbott, was the manager. They had incredible sales promotions. One that I can think of, Dobbs Ford. It was like the largest Ford dealer in the country, I believe, at the time. they talked them into doing a live broadcast there, and they were really skeptical about it. And the girls came out and they had on black and white polka dotted skirts and WHER in their sweater, and they were all there together. And Sam came in this big old top hat, and it was a sight. They actually had police officers that were blocking off the streets because there were so many people that were coming by. Elvis stopped by in his pink Cadillac while they were there. And every time they would sell a car, they were live on the air, they'd ring a bell. And they sold more cars that day. Like, I think it was that day was like 35 cars maybe, but more than they had ever sold in a single day at that point, having WHER out there. So people were starting to take notice, like, okay, maybe they can do this, and wow, they're effectively selling things, and what's going on. But it was pretty incredible.
They had a brand, and it was something that people connected with, and so it made a great kind of force with that. Something else that was mentioned in there, so you say that was kind of like a live, almost on the scene broadcast, but they mentioned multiple times in the video of people kind of coming to watch it there. Is that something that happened regularly? Also, was it something that people did with like all male broadcasts as well, or was it something particularly here?
It just kind of depended on where they were. There were stations that you could come stand outside the glass, but Sam, the way he set up HER, especially when they went to the Mid-City building, he put a speaker outside. So they not only could they see them, they were kind of like in a fishbowl almost, big glass, but they could hear everything that was going on too. So they kind of felt like they were part of the experience. And it was really cool back then because, today, you hop online and see everything, but that was really the only way to get any kind of like visual idea of what it was like to be on air in there. And, they were really pushing the envelope with things that they did. They had, in some places, they had like bras and panties hanging in the window, the unmentionables, they called it, that was very controversial, First of all, you're not at home. You're not fixing someone a sandwich. You're going to work and you're, doing a man's job. And, your bras and panties are hanging in the window. And, they did it with incredible class. There was nothing trashy about it. But boy, was it outside of the box. It really was.
Kind of a tongue-in-cheek a little bit, kind of a little,
It was playful. It was.
I love
beautiful. That. And their beauty was really enhanced by their talent.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't just pretty. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people will go, "Oh my gosh, all those girls were so pretty." And like they were stunning because they were so smart and they were so brave and they worked so hard. And to me, that just, made them very remarkable people in my book.
It definitely, and if you think about it, radio strips away all of that. It has to be that you have that personality. You have to have that quick-wittedness to be able to come up with something there. Yeah. And so it's definitely something that, it didn't matter what your face looked like. It mattered what was in your brain and what you were saying and how you could say it. And so I agree with you 100%. It was also so brave to join in on something like this because there were people who probably didn't like it. There were people who probably didn't like that it was all women.
No, they didn't. Like I said, they called WHER WHOR. Mm-hmm. It was just ugly. They were hateful. They did not like it at all. They didn't think there was a place for women, in the workplace, and much less working and getting paid to do it.
Yeah.
It was different. And then, you've got Peggy Sternberger who was doing sports casting. And, I do think there was one lady in the 1930s, and her name is escaping me, not associated with us, that I think did some sports casting. But other than her, I think Peggy was probably one of the first female sportscasters as well, because everything that I can research, it's kind of emerging in the mid-70s for everything else. And she went on to CBS to do some sports casting for golf. She was a golfer.
Yeah.
And these ladies, most of them had no experience. And that was kind of Sam's thing. These artists, the musicians he recorded, they were not classically trained musicians. They had soul. Like none of his artists that he recorded, musically speaking, sounded the same. Like modern radio today, you turn it on, a lot of times it's like, who is that? I'm not sure. He had a sound with them, and it wasn't because they were already popular, it's because they were unique. And it was the same way with these ladies. They were inexperienced disc jockeys for the most part, other than my grandmother and Marion Keisker. Everyone else, like they worked in, clothing stores. Like he would find these ladies like wanting to come in and do ads for a woman's clothing store, and he'd go, hey, how would you feel about being on the radio? Same way
Oh,
with
wow.
Meg playing golf. Well, you're a golfer, and I like your voice. How would you feel about doing color commentary? It's just kind of crazy to think that, because I think we hyper focus on like your resume, and
Mhm.
look what he did just kind of as a talent scout and just giving people a chance.
That was really a gift to be able to find that talent and cultivate it and
Mhm.
identify it and bring somebody in like that, both with the music and with these radio personalities, which is just amazing. And it shows just how successful, he was, and being able to identify things like that.
He believed in people, like he, and that left a lasting impression on me. That's really what I'm most proud of, was just his admiration just for humanity as a
Mhm.
whole. And he really did have a soft spot, because he knew what it was like to be poor and to be sickly and to live with people who were challenged. And so, he recognized things in people that most people wouldn't.
That's amazing. We do have a question from audience member. They had a typo, so I'll correct that for them. Why do you think Sam chose to buy a radio company in Florence, Alabama, as opposed to another one in Memphis? So why did he make that move back to Alabama?
Well, he was born in Florence, and really those were his roots. The Tennessee River, growing up on the farm with his dad, like I said, picking cotton, those relationships that he made, and his start at WLAY was here. That's where he met Becky. That's where they fell in love with each other. So really, that was the start of his radio and music journey. It was kind of, it was the beginning of it all. And he always loved this area. He just really, really loved it. And so when he got out of the music business, he really he wanted to come home. He wanted to have a radio station in his hometown. He was very, very proud of that. He loved the Shoals, and that's, that's where I am now. I was actually did the opposite thing. I was born in Memphis, and I worked for him a little bit before he passed away in Memphis. And then I moved here in 2003 to start working for our family radio group. And my father, I think he's watching right now, Jerry Phillips, he's our owner, and my uncle Knox, who recently, he passed in 2020, used to be our owner, but they've really carried our businesses forward, and that's what I'm trying to do, and I'm very proud to be here. And we still split our time between Florence and Memphis. We've got recording studios in Memphis. These two cities will always be very special and very influential to me, and I know certainly to the rest of the world.
Definitely. We have another question here from Keith. So were the girls at WHER taken seriously by their male peers? So we've talked a little bit about some of the other people, listeners, but what about other male disc jockeys? Were they seen as equals in the industry? Any challenges they faced? So if you could just expand, I guess, a little bit more on that. You've mentioned some kind of the pushback, but do you know if some of the other radio stations in Memphis, were they welcoming to them? Did they kind of keep them at arm's length?
It was kind of a mixed bag from what I understand. Most of the ladies could only hold a position in some other stations as a copywriter. Like that was like the highest level you could get. You could get a production job. So, a lot of people hated it. A lot of people were really ugly about it. But of course, there were people who supported it. But that's kind of what it was like during those times. There were people who locked arms with Sam and thought, him recording blues musicians during segregated times was what needed to happen. And there were people who hated him for it. Same thing with an all-female radio station. There were people who thought, wow, this is super cool. And certainly there were men that, and there still are, unfortunately. I mean, it's not as many, but boy, let me tell you what, it still doesn't feel all the time like it's the same for all of us. So, we still got to keep working at it. But yeah, it was mixed. Everything that I've ever heard is, somewhere and somewhere not.
No, it's you, when we did a series last year about women's history in particular, this topic would have gone perfectly in either of them, because it really is like there's so similarities of you see kind of these gains happening and people who are supportive, and then people who are kind of hesitant to see women kind of going into a field that they don't think of as, traditionally female.
Right.
And so there is all that kind of tension back and forth, which is just what makes this story even more inspiring, is that they kind of just kept pushing forward with it and they adapted when necessary. And your grandfather actually said something that I just loved the quote, and I wrote it down. Radio is a living thing.
Yes.
And so how it's constantly adapting. So I'd love to, if we get another question from an audience member, maybe we can go to that. But one of my final questions is just commenting on how that plays out today. You know, it's a living thing, it adapts.
Yeah.
How do you see the future of radio kind of going, but also specifically women's role in radio? You know, that's a big question, but kind of, I love tying a lot of this history into the present day. You've already done it a little bit, but just how radio continues to be an important part of our lives.
Sure. Radio is all about your community. You know, a lot has changed with radio, no doubt. There's a lot of competing mediums right now. We are having to evolve and adapt quite a bit. You know, I mean, a long time ago, we adopted streaming our stations and developing mobile applications and things so that we could kind of have some brand extensions of what we already do really well. But we always wanted to use those tools as an enhancement and not a replacement. I do think some radio stations get that wrong, because I think the most important thing we have left is our community. You know, I mean, what's going on in high school sports, you know, people want to know about that in your community. They may not be listening to see if it's sunny and 75 today, but let me tell you what, if there's a tornado ripping through and Ryan Seacrest is given his top 40 and you're syndicated, I just think that's a miss, you know, because that's our strength. Yeah, a lot has changed. I wish we could, honestly, I feel like I was born in the wrong time, because I wish I could go back to where it was just like radio, TV, and newspaper, because boy, what a great time that was. It's like so confusing now, and advertisers are confused because there's 5 million things that you should do. Like, should you be on radio? Should you be on TV? Should you be doing digital marketing? How do you do digital marketing? How are you effective with Facebook? You know, and it's just kind of crazy. But the one thing that is tried and true is that if you can turn on your radio station, it's free. And if you have a live voice in there, it's typically somebody that you trust, that has the power to influence you and to protect you. And, you know, really, we're given our license to serve and protect the community, not to play music. You know, that's what radio is supposed to be. And that's what we really try to still be here at our station. Not everyone is that way, but we still employ live and local talent. We're still very involved with our community. And, you know, we're trying like hell to hang on to that, because, you know, like I said, people like just want to sometimes bypass you in the car and stuff. But we're working hard to be in the digital dash too, and we're coming. So we're not giving up.
I love that. Constantly, like you said, you got to keep adapting to the community. I think that's a really important thing that you said. Like, radio is such a community-based thing. And yes, it can go, frequencies can take you very far, especially today they can, but it's all about where are you located and making sure that you're adapting within that community.
Yeah.
We do have another one. This will be our final question from the audience. So this is from Carol Priggett. How did WHER evolve as the women's movement came about in the 70s? This is another kind of thing of evolving and adapting. How did they kind of incorporate, or did they kind of incorporate that women's movement in the 70s, 60s and 70s into it?
Well, you know, I mean, WHER was on the air for 17 years. In the 70s, it became WWEE. A gentleman named Bill Thomas got involved, and it became kind of mixed with men and women again. I don't know. It just kind of felt like things were sort of balancing out. It wasn't as cool to me then as it was, you know, in the 50s and 60s. But I think the wavelengths, you know, it was still going out, and it still is. But, you know, its run ended in the 70s. And, you know, WHER, it may be something that I bring back at some point.
That's really cool.
I'd love to. I certainly would love to see a movie done. I think, like I said, what everybody heard today is just a very small part of the story. You know, there's over 40 women that were a part of that station, and you know, there's a lot more to be told.
No, definitely. Even like I said, that one video it was so great that you were able to create that, but it only gave us just a small snippet. I can tell, like, just by your passion with it, but also by that video, that this is such a complex and complicated story that it's so exciting that Alabamians were at the helm of it, of creating this huge moment for radio, but also for women. And so thank you so much for sharing your family story and your own story and helping us tell an Alabama radio moment.
Absolutely.
And
Very much.
you to you joined us today. And I hope to see you all again next week for our book talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.